So thank you guys all for coming to this workshop on writing reproducible manuscripts in R. It's something I'm really passionate about. It's really, the moment I started, I thought, why have I not been doing this before? It saves you so much time. So we'll talk a little bit about the motivations for doing this and the benefits of it. And I hope that after this session, you'll be as excited about it as I am. So an alternative title for this talk is Do Your Data Sci Like It's Going to Need an Alibi. So if you ever are put in front of the reproducibility judges, all you need to do is show your exhibit, which is your R Markdown document, and they will have nothing for you. So I love this artwork. It's all by Allison Horst, which I should give credit to. And you can find the slides at bit.ly/Shalon -APA. I can put it in the chat. And it's also on my website. We'll get the link to my website soon. So because this is all created, the slides are also created in R, so it might take a while to load. So I have a static version uploaded to my website as well, if you would like that, just a PDF basically. All right, so let's get started. The outline for today, my plan is to do brief introductions. We've already done some, so we'll skip most of it except for maybe one more formal question about what you'd like to get out of the workshop. And then we'll be talking about what we'll be doing, which is dynamic and reproducible manuscripts. I'll briefly describe what they are. Why, so what the benefits are of taking up an alternative workflow, and how. And that's a tutorial that will be split into two parts. One part is an introduction to R Markdown itself, which is a very general purpose tool that you can use for authoring many different things, not just manuscripts. And the second part will be more specifically tailored to writing APA manuscripts. All right, so in terms of the introductions, I already briefly introduced myself. I'm a PhD student in OB at Stanford GSB, and I'm really interested in statistical inference and hypothesis testing, and in the adoption and promotion of tools that relate to open and reproducible science. And lately, I've gotten really into crowdsourced and big team science. So replicating things in many labs, or having hundreds of teams of researchers run the exact same question on the exact same data set to take a look at how variable the results are based on degrees of freedom. So what I'd like to hear from you, just briefly, what do you hope to get out of this workshop, and what's your previous experience with R Studio and R Markdown, because that will help me tailor the workshop a little bit more to your needs. So I'm just going to popcorn. Jeffrey, do you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so I think we did introductions. Okay, so what I hope to gain. You know, I was told about R Markdown and this particular function a few years ago, maybe 2 years ago. I think it's a great idea, but I find R to have barriers to entry that, in spite of its freeware value, and I think it's fantastic in that regard, being this community resource, I find it non-intuitive, and unfortunately, given the constraints of all the commitments that I have right now, it creates an even harder barrier of learning. So if I can even get a foothold in something that I truly find valuable, so that I can learn R more easily, I think it could be more of a resource to me. I keep finding when I do learn R for stats purposes, I keep reverting back to SPSS or other programs that I'm familiar with. And I mean, I feel I'm missing out on opportunities to guide students who are unfamiliar with this. I'm putting a lot more burden on them to guide their own way forward, which I think a lot of them are happy to do. But I think if I was there to reinforce it, it would be better for us both. Anyway, sorry, that's a bit longer winded than you probably wanted, but there.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing. So I completely agree that R has a pretty steep learning curve at first. And that's why I hope to do things today that will decrease that barrier. and that will make it easier to start using it. And I'm always happy to send example manuscripts so that all you have to do is, change the contents and at the click of a button have your own. So that's great to know. Bethan?
Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble with my connection, but hopefully this works. So I'd say I'm pretty similar to Jeffrey, and I have some experience with R and RStudio, but because I find it takes longer with my basic analyses, I tend to go back to using Stata for most of what I run my stats on. And I only use R when it's something Stata can't handle. And so with getting out of the session, I want to get kind of that basic comfort so that I could start, pretty much get my foot in the door, start learning this. And this might be a little difficult. I can only make the first 30 minutes of the session. So hopefully I'll get what I can in that time.
Yeah, and like I said, it will be recorded, so you can always watch the rest later and go through the materials online. Yeah, I hear this, similarities between both your answers, which is that we tend to go back to what feels familiar to us, like SPSS or Stata, and especially because they have these drag and drop functionalities that you can just click which analysis you want. That I think is what a lot of people are missing when they use R. Recently, they've started building this into like a Visual Studio editor, but it does take, of course, a bit longer. One of the things that I hope we'll get out of this workshop is seeing the cost that comes with, SPSS and Stata when you generate things at the click of a button, which means that you'll have to copy it from one place to another or transcribe it from one place to another. And if you decide to change something, you'll have to do the exact same process over and over again. Nicole?
Hi, everyone. So I'm a bit opposite. I don't know how to use SPSS or Stata. I only learned R kind of on purpose because I knew it would be a steep learning curve. And honestly, I was so nervous about using R that I wouldn't even close my RStudio because I didn't know how to load my working directory to that extent, but I've gotten much more confident with it. And I've been just really impressed at the things I can do. And now I'm in the phase where I'm writing up a lot of projects and I feel like I'm just always doing the same thing, copy and pasting, and just doing the same kind of formats of paragraphs. And so it'd be super cool if I could have a markdown for a mediation paragraph or something and have all of the text filled in and the formatting. I don't know if that's what you're going to show us, but that would be great. But yeah, I'm excited to learn more. I've used Markdown just a bit for a class assignment, but not for anything on my own.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. Sarah, I noticed you have your camera off. If you'd rather watch this passively, that's fine. Or if you want to share, that's fine too. Just let me know what you'd like to do. If I get no answer, I will assume that we can move on. All right, thank you so much, everyone. So let's talk for a moment about the typical workflow when we do academic research. So when writing up our manuscripts, our typical workflow is usually to do our analysis, for instance, in R or Python or Stata or SPSS. And then we copy paste or otherwise save our graphs and results. And then we open a program such as Microsoft Word to communicate these results. And on top of that, we'll also have to manually format these results and our citations and find place for our tables and figures, etc. So here's a discussion question for the group. What are common challenges that you have when working in this fashion, and what kind of problems could arise when you work like this?
Should I just chime in, or do you want me to raise my hand? How do you want to?
Sure. Oh, sorry. Yeah, let me just clarify to everyone. You're always welcome to just unmute yourself and speak up. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, you referred to some of them, I think, that are important. For example, the standardization, right? Let's say for one of the issues that I've had occurred to me over time, multiple times, is you realize that the sample size for some analyses are different from another. You didn't catch it originally. and now you have to figure out what the samples should be throughout the entire results section, and then rewrite different analyses, case in point. Like, so I feel like a lot of the tasks would be of that nature, for example.
Similarly, when you run robustness checks, having to like go back through and retype in kind of all the details in your different tables after having run different robustness checks, it's just completely time consuming.
Yeah, 100% agree with both your points. Yeah. All right, so I think that both the points you made are gonna be shown in this short little video that I really love. Let me know if the audio works for you. It should. I believe I am sharing with audio. Let me check. Share sound. Yes. All right. So it's about a minute long. I know this is super nerdy, but I really, really love this video. All right, so I think another one that we really haven't really talked about is, you know, this endless slog of having to redo everything and having 20 different documents. Version 1, version 2, version 3, version final 2, version final 3, et cetera, et cetera. And so hopefully we'll talk today about a method that will allow you to never do that again. So like Beth Ann said, one of the typical workflow challenges is that it's very time consuming. It's also error prone. So if we're copy pasting or manually transcribing, we could make rounding errors. We could make any kind of transcription error. And then, of course, in terms of the bigger picture for science generally, it lacks transparency for yourself and for others who would maybe like to reproduce your work. And one thing I want to add to this is that you want to be as kind as possible to your future self. We all know it sometimes takes years, or it actually often takes years to get work published. So once you're in a later stage and you have to go back to what you did before, you don't want to have to start from scratch and have to reinvent the wheel and figure out what you did. You would like to exactly know what you did and how, and be able to redo it at the click of a button. And that's the ideal. So another challenge is that it's really difficult to maintain and update, like we discussed, endless rewriting and reformatting. And then there's also the overhead costs of moving between different computing and software environments. I asked here if there's anything else. I think we've covered everything. I also think I want to be mindful of time, so I'll move on because I know that Beth Ann can't stay for too long, so that we can cover as much as possible in the meantime. So what's the alternative workflow that I'm talking about today? The alternative is to find a workflow that does not have your analyses and your write-up in separate places. It's a way to, it's a method that fuses your code and your writing. and that it directly embeds your results in your report, in your manuscript, and automatically reflects analytic changes in your documentation. So what that means is, let's say I ran a regression model and I forgot to include one covariate. When I add that covariate later, all I have to do is click one button and the changes will be automatically reflected in my documentation. I won't have to change anything. The numbers, the updated numbers are just there. And also it will update all your results, figures, and tables automatically, and even do the automatic formatting. So today what I'll be presenting is a package for APA formatting. So all you'll have to do is write up your text, and when you knit it, you'll have a manuscript that conforms to the APA guidelines and has formatted everything, including your citations and reference lists, according to the APA guidelines. So why do we want to do this? Go for it, Jeffrey. Yeah.
Just a couple questions on that. So APA formatting, I mean, that's a constantly changing beast as well. And they recently had that recent guideline, I think it was last year, the year before. So is it going to be that level of guideline or the guideline before that?
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great question. So the version that I'm currently using is best for APA 6. And of course, we're already at APA 7 now. And I know that the creator of the package is working on incorporating version 7. And there are certain workarounds to get 7 in there as well. Yeah. But so these packages are often updated by the people who created them. So when a new version comes out, ideally, you'll be able to use that new version for your manuscript. Yeah. All right, so briefly, why we want to work in this way is, one, it's less error prone, it's less time consuming, and it's more dynamic, more reproducible, and more transparent. So the weapon of choice that we'll be talking about today in the first part of the tutorial is R Markdown. So what's R Markdown? R Markdown is an authoring framework for data science, and it's designed specifically for the goal of reproducibility. The basic idea, the basic principle is that the same document holds your code and the whole narrative surrounding the data, and that the results are automatically generated from the code, and that you can use a single R Markdown file to save and execute your code and generate high quality reports that you can share with an audience. So I love this, this artwork, which is basically telling you that the whole idea of R Markdown is getting the band back together, and the individual band members are your texts, your outputs, and your code. So brief introduction to R Markdown. With R Markdown, you can create dynamic analysis documents that combine your code, your output, including your figures and tables, and your writing. And it can be used to reproduce your analyses, collaborate and share your code with others, and communicate your results with others. What I like about R Markdown is it is incredibly general purpose. You can not only create manuscripts with it, but you can create slideshows, websites. I built my own website using R, blogs, books, dashboards, and interactive documents. And with the very same document, and this is what is meant by dynamic, with the very same document, at the click of one button, you can decide to knit it into a PDF or a Word version, or even an HTML, depending on what the journal expects from you, for instance. So the bonus question, how did I create my slides? Unfortunately, I think I already gave that one away. Oh, Nicole just asked. I did indeed make these slides in R, yes. So here's a little sneak peek of the power of R Markdown. So I'll be talking more about what you see here. What you see here in between these 3 dashes is what we call the metadata of a document, the front matter also. And in it, I specify certain parameters like the title, the author, the keywords, the word count, etc. And then when I click knit, which means render this document, this is what's created. a whole document is created, but I'm just showing you the title page now so that you can see, it's just like we expect our manuscripts to look like, with our running head over here and the author name and a footnote for their department, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a quick sneak peek of what it looks like. And here's a sneak peek of the content of a document. So here's what I write in R Markdown. And as you can see here, something we'll be talking about today is how to do these citations, references. And here you'll see what is automatically knitted from it, which includes all these references exactly in the way that we want them to be. And you can also do extra things like acknowledgements to the packages of R you use, for instance. I would recommend this specifically because we're relying on open source free work that other people did for us. So it's always nice to acknowledge them for that. So I have a discussion question. Can we think of any good reasons to not use R Markdown?
The first thing I think of is trying to share with my co-authors. And I know track changes and the final version and everything is very frustrating, but I can't see a situation where I'm getting my co-authors who are professors to be editing documents in R Markdown.
Exactly. I completely agree with that. And that, I feel like, is the biggest challenge for me right now, is working with collaborators, specifically, my advisor, for instance. I'm never going to ask my advisor to work with GitHub and pull requests and things like that. So I completely agree with that. I hope there are currently things in development, but I do think that this is currently possibly the biggest limitation to its uptake in academia. Is we really like tracking changes in Word and being able to accept and reject them. And it makes sense, right? It makes sense to be able to see what other people did. And so that's tracking changes is definitely still pretty challenging in R Markdown. Yeah. Anything else that comes to mind? I think Nicole brought up the one concern that is most relevant in practice. One other concern that I have, which you'll notice when you start working more with R Markdown versus R, like base R, and doing more computationally intensive stuff. Like Nicole, I know you're interested in NLP. One thing you'll find is that R Markdown is not as efficient as using normal R. So it takes a little bit longer to knit an R Markdown than to run things in an R script. So that's one thing to keep in mind, and to be open about these limitations of what I'm presenting today. So let's delve into the practicalities, the first part of R Markdown. So the way we get started with R Markdown is we install R Studio, the R Markdown package, and LaTeX. So these are all clickable links. If you open the slides, I believe I sent the link, yes, to the group chat. So bit.ly/Shalon-APA. You can click on all these links to download the prerequisite software. So the way you install R Markdown is just by running in your R console install.packages and then between parentheses and quotation marks R Markdown. And we'll do the same thing for TinyText, which is a distribution, a LaTeX distribution. And LaTeX is what you need to generate PDF output from R. So here's a visual overview, or a little GIF of how you open a new R Markdown. So you can simply click File, New File, R Markdown, and then this is what you'll see. And what it provides you is a notebook interface. So what that means is that it allows for direct interaction with R. You can execute your code and immediately display your code results inline, which makes it easy to test and iterate. And it produces a reproducible document with publication quality output. So I think this goes a little bit back to some of the things we discussed. Bye, Beth. I think this goes back a little bit to what we discussed about how you'd rather have what you see is what you get kind of interface, like you just click and run analyses, and R Markdown is more like that than running a simple R script. With R Markdown, you really can interact with your code more and see the results immediately under what you run. So there are 3 types of content that I'll go through. One I already briefly mentioned is the YAML metadata. That's the front matter here between these 3 brackets. So this is where I specify certain parameters like the title of the document, the author name, and the date, etc. And then the second type of content is the text itself. And the text itself uses Markdown formatting, which we'll talk about. And the third element is our code. So what you see here, these little chunks here in between these 3 backticks, that's a code chunk. And this text here, that's just the normal text with, as you can see, Markdown formatting, like 2 pound signs for a header, for a second level header. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'll go through each 3 of these types of contents briefly. So first, the metadata. We have a header, which is called the YAML header, and that contains basic metadata and rendering instructions. So here you see the title, the author, the output, and the date. And the interesting thing here is that this date is actually, I did not write this manually. It's, I wrote it with a line of code. So here you see the line of code that I wrote. I wrote date, and then between quotation marks and backticks, R to specify the language, and sys.date, so the date of the system. And the date will be dynamically updated every single time we knit the report with the help of this line of code. And that's called inline code, and I'll tell you more about that in just a little bit. So this is how you can preview an R Markdown. When you're in the R Markdown itself, you can click that little wheel over there and click preview in window, or in your viewer pane. And that way you can preview what your knitted document will look like. So now let's talk a little bit about how you render the document, which is, like I said before, we call this knitting. So there's a little knit button, or you can use a shortcut. So if you're on a Mac, you use Command-Shift-K. If you're on Windows, you use Control-Shift-K to render the document. And the whole idea of knitting is to take that underlying document and to knit it as a wizard into this final high quality publication output. So here's an example of the different output formats that it can take. Here you see that the output here is set to HTML document, but there's a line of code here that says render my example.rmd in a different output format. So this is the default HTML that we've set, but right now we asked R in the console to generate a Word document. And right here to the right, you see it generate a Word document for us. And the same here with a button over here where you can click knit, and then you can click knit to PDF, for instance, and we see a PDF here. So what's happening behind the scene is that you have code within your .rmd file that is executed and converted into an MD file, a Markdown file. And this is then converted to the output format that you specified in your metadata in the header, such as a PDF, an HTML, or a Word doc. And what happens when you knit an R Markdown file is that it starts a new R session in which no packages or objects are loaded, and it sets your working directory to the location of the R Markdown file. So you will not have to set the working directory, which is something you often need to do when you work in an R script. It executes all your code chunks from top to bottom, and then generates the document. So one thing to keep in mind is that you have to make sure to load all the R packages you use. For instance, in the first chunk, which we often call the setup chunk. So let's talk about the second type of content that I mentioned, code. So there's two types of code in R Markdown. One is a code chunk surrounded by three backticks and R. So right here, you see a code chunk. And then there's also an inline code expression surrounded by one backtick and R, and that's right here. So inline means that, well, let me actually get to that slide later and to tell you what it is so that you can see it more clearly. So let's talk about code chunks first. So according to one of the main developers of R Markdown, code chunks really are the beating heart of our R Markdown. So here's a code chunk, for instance, and in that code chunk, I asked, give me the summary of orange, which is an inbuilt data set in R. And so I get a bunch of trees and their age and their circumference. Yes, Nicole, go for it.
I'm just wondering, can you give us a definition of what R Markdown is? Is it like, it's not a package, right? It's like something that sits on top of R.
Yeah, it is a package. It is an R package, but I would define it mostly as an authoring framework. So it's a framework to get your code and your results together in a notebook interface. That's how I would broadly define it. Yeah.
Okay, so the R code is running underneath it, but it's like a notebook interface.
Yeah. The R code is directly running in the R Markdown file. So I would say it's both at the same time, like a notebook interface that runs your code. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Sure. All right, so how do you insert a code chunk? So how do you insert your beating heart into your file? You can use a shortcut for this. So that's Command Option I, or Control Alt I if you're not on a Mac, or you can just write it out. So enclose your code with three backticks and R between these braces. And there's also a small little button for it, which is a plus sign and a green square with a C in it for a chunk. So here you see a little graphic of how we insert a code chunk. So this person, the GIF creator, is going to that insert button and clicks R, and there you go. Now we have a code chunk in which you could write, for instance, summary orange, like I did before. So here's the anatomy of a code chunk. We have these backticks that open and close the chunk. We have the braces that start with R to specify the language. And within these braces, we specify our chunk's properties, which I'll tell you more about later. So here, for instance, it says echo equals false, which means do not show my code in the document that I knit, which is very useful, of course, because when we write our manuscript, we don't actually want the reader to see our R code, right? We just want the R code to generate the output. So that's a very helpful thing about code chunks, is that you can control the behavior of the code. You can control whether it shows up in your output document, etc. And I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit. So like I said, this specifies that we're running R code. And then we have the word pressure here, which is the name. So everything you write after R is the chunk label, the name of the chunk. And you don't have to name your chunks, but it is recommended, because I'll show you this later. When you name your chunks, it's much easier to navigate your file, and also to know, for instance, if you have errors, where they are coming from. If you have very slow code, which chunk is doing that? And that's all useful information to know. And then, of course, we have the text over here, plot pressure, which is the R code to execute. So like I said, it's recommended to name your code chunks because it allows you to quickly navigate your code, name your figures, and troubleshoot errors. So like you see here in the GIF, when you click here on chunk, you can jump to different chunks, like chunk 3, pressure, chunk 2, cars, etc. So like I said, the chunk options allow you to control a chunk's behavior by passing additional comma separated arguments. If you write echo equals true after R pressure, for instance, you write comma and then echo equals true, then you will show your code and your output in the generated document, in the knitted document. And this is the default. Now, if you set it to false, then you will only show your output and hide your code. You could also, instead of echo, write include equals false, which means do not show my output at all, but do run the code. So this is helpful if you're, for instance, if it's your first chunk in which you specify all the packages that you need, if you load all the packages that you will use in your Markdown file. Or it's useful if you just want to create an object. For instance, you want to run a regression. So you create a regression model object so that you can later refer to it. Then this is how you do that. You specify include equals false. There's also eval equals false, which means show the code, but do not run and don't have any output. Now, this is what I do, for instance, when I show you here, down here, summary orange. What I'm doing here is I'm just showing you my code without running it or without showing output. And that might be helpful. I think that's probably not as helpful for manuscripts. I don't think there's often cases where we only want to show our code, unless you have, for instance, an appendix for your code. Then there's also the opportunity to remove your warning messages, error messages, and simply all messages. And here's also, I only found out about this recently, there's a little wheel right here by your code chunks that you can click on, and then you can simply do, you know, the thing that we talked about, which is just click on what you want, like show your output only, show warnings, show messages, etc. So you won't have to memorize all of this, but you can simply use the settings wheel for this. Let me check. Nicole. So are you asking me if you can use these commands in an R script?
In R Studio, yeah.
In R, and what do you mean when you say R Studio? You mean just a normal R script, right?
Yeah.
You,
or are these specific to R Markdown?
Yeah, so these chunk options are specific to code chunks, which you run in R Markdown. There is a way to generate R Markdowns from an R script, but then you might as well work directly in the Markdown. So in the end, the general principle is the same, which is that you specify these commands in a code chunk, which is not directly what you do in an R script. In an R script, you just write your code. Although I do think, by the way, there are ways in a normal R script to turn off warning messages and things like that. Yeah,
Okay, cool.
You definitely can do that, but these commands that I'm showing you right here are specific to code chunks in R Markdown. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
Shalon,
Yeah.
just wanted to take a look. So it seems I'm really rolling this back a little bit, but the code chunks are where you're going to put whatever it is you want, what output or code or whatever. And you've been going through what allows us to do it. But outside of those code chunks would be the text that you would wish to write.
Exactly.
And can you format that? Like, I mean, like, do you have full range of formatting as you would ordinarily do in a Word document or whatnot?
Yes. So that's going to be the next part that we'll be discussing is the text itself. So we have the three elements of an R Markdown file, which is the front end, which we already discussed, the metadata, and then the code. And after this, we'll discuss the text itself, which you can format according to Markdown syntax. And I'll go through it and also give you resources for it. I think personally, it's very straightforward. It is simple. So it's things like you can easily create headers and italicize and bold and things like that. You can't easily, for instance, change the color or things like that. It is created to be a pretty simple and straightforward formatting tool. Yeah. So, mhm.
If I could just ask a couple more questions about that.
Sure.
But the figures that you wish to insert, for example,
Mhm.
like, do you have the full range of, say, ggplot2 and all that stuff?
Yeah,
And you could do
definitely.
color within those and all that?
Certainly, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
So when I said the formatting is basic, I mean for the text itself. So
Okay.
the text, the prose basically that you write, that is has pretty basic formatting options. But for the plots and the figures, the world is your oyster. You can do everything that you can do with R. So, and that's what it's designed for, to make beautiful publication-ready plots and tables and figures. So in that regard, you have full functionality. Yeah.
Great.
So the way we execute a chunk is you can simply put your cursor at the front of the code and use a shortcut, Control or plus Enter, or if you're on a Mac, Command plus Enter, or you can simply press this button here. So that again is what makes this a notebook interface rather than just a code, a script, a programming language, is that you have buttons that you can press to run your code and to look at it, and you can then click it away like this person does right here. So like I said, there's two types of code, and we already talked about the code chunks, which is those bigger chunks that we, for instance, specify our linear regression model. But sometimes we want to refer to statistical results in our text, right? We want to say there was a significant difference between group 1 and 2, M equals 1.54 for group 1, M equals 2.02 for group 2, and then the p-value. Now those things, our goal is to never have to write that out manually again. So this is where the magic comes in. I love inline code and use it all the time. So what inline code does is, what R Markdown will do is they will display the results of the inline code, but not the code itself, and apply the relevant text formatting to the results. So here's an example. This is my R Markdown document in which I wrote, this text that we've been talking about, Jeffrey, just to avoid copy pasting, we can execute R code, etc. And then I say, for instance, and here I say M equals, and then between these backticks, I write R mean of sleep $extra. So here I'm saying, take the variable extra from the data frame sleep and give me the mean of it. And then when I knit my document, so this is the R Markdown document, and then when I click knit, here you get M equals 1.54. Now we know that you will never have to write that manually again. And if you have those two new participants in your data, you won't even know what the mean is. It will just automatically generate it for you. So this is where I think that the beauty really comes in. Nicole, were you going to say something?
Yeah, this is super cool. I was wondering about rounding. Does it already know to just put 2?
So in this case, I think this data set just comes with a nicely rounded number, but this is the beauty about using R. Let's say it wasn't a nicely rounded number, then what we would just do is enclose this command, mean, in another command called round. So you would say round, open parentheses, and then after this parentheses, write comma 2 to get 2 decimals and close it with the parenthesis. And then you'd have your rounded result. And so in that way, you can even have, distinct formatting options depending on what it is. So for instance, with p-values, we know that when it's less than 0.001, we actually don't want it to round to 0. We want it to literally print p less than 0.001. So you can write little code and R functions to make that happen. Yeah. All right, so now we get to the text, which is what we've just been talking about. So here's the Markdown formatting basics. So if you want to write italics, you can write it in between these little asterisks. Bold is 2 asterisks, and then code, that's the backticks that I've already discussed. You can also include links. So if you write the word links in between these brackets, square brackets, and then between parentheses, the link itself, you will have a hyperlink in your document that they can click on called links. referring to this link that you wrote out here between parentheses. And then of course you have lists, bolded lists here if you use these dashes. And you can even write math equations. And what you do for that is between dollar signs, you can use LaTeX syntax. And for that, you'll have to look at online at different resources too. I'm always happy to help. I found it really intuitive to learn. And of course, references, which we'll be talking about when we get to the APA part of the workshop. So if you want to see all the formatting options, there's the R Markdown reference guide that you can click on. And here you'll see some more examples. So I just already described that you can do italics between asterisks. You can also do it between underscores, would work the same. Same with bold. You can superscript, which is helpful. Sometimes we have our tables in which we do our little asterisks to show that something's significant. We often superscript that. And different headers, of course. And these headers, by the way, when you knit to APA, will show in the formatting that they need to be in an APA document. All right, so, and there's also a really cool functionality to include tables. Now, here you see a knitted table, and there's different options like Xtable, Stargazer. I know a lot of people use Stargazer also in Psych. I will tell you more about APA tables when we get to that part in part 2. So some closing remarks on R Markdown, some tips and tricks. Load all your R packages that you need in the first code chunk. Do not include install.packages or set working directory. Set working directory is simply not necessary because in R Markdown will always set as its working directory the location of the file. And install.packages, when you try to knit a document in which you tell it to install a package, it will throw an error. It doesn't know what to do with that. Same with, for instance, view. I don't know if you've ever in RStudio used the command view to look at your data. When you have that in your R Markdown, it won't know what to do with that. There's another really cool tip for me since I started writing my manuscripts. R Markdown also has a spell check, just like Word. So, and it's been working really wonderfully for me. And then there's also different places within R to get help. There's a cheat sheet under File Help cheat sheets, and there's an R Markdown cheat sheet under there. And then there's also a Markdown quick reference for your formatting options of your text. In terms of resources, I highly recommend these 2 books, the R Markdown, the Definitive Guide, and the Cookbook. Both of those books are written by very active R Markdown developers. And I found them very useful to learn the ins and outs. So let's get to the second part, which is really going to bring it all together and allow us to create APA manuscripts in R. So the way that we do that is with a specific package called created by Frederick Aust. And it's a package called papaja, which stands for Preparing APA Journal Articles. I already gave you the sneak peek before. I love it. I just love clicking a button and then getting an APA manuscript. And here's a sneak peek on APA tables, which also makes me very happy. No more manual formatting of tables ever again. So here, what I do, as you by now know, this is an R code chunk, and I create a model. I create an object called mod1 for model 1, in which I run a linear regression. So LM stands for linear model. Between parentheses, I say, please predict overall well-being from religiosity, age, gender, socioeconomic status, and education. And I specify where my data is. I say my data is in an object called DF. This is actually for a project, for one of those many analyst projects. I told you at the beginning, I'm very excited about team science. So this is a project where we have over 100 different teams look at the very same data set to answer the same question, which is, does religiosity increase well-being? And after I create this model, I run the command APA_print, which is in the Papaya package, I believe. So I tell it to APA print my object model 1, and I create an object for that. And then I simply run APA table, and I extract the table from my APA LM object here. And I can write my own caption, which you can personalize, of course, customize to your own needs. And this is what we get. So it automatically creates this regression table in Times New Roman, where we have our predictors, we have our estimates, we have 95% confidence intervals, we have the t-values with the degrees of freedom between the parentheses, and the p-values. And like you see, the p-values are exactly formatted in the way that we always expect our p-values to be. So this is partly where I got very excited about Papaya and about using R for my markdowns. Sorry, for my manuscripts. So the way you get started with Papaya is, so we already discussed that you need TinyText to be able to generate PDFs. We did that in the first part. In your R console, you run install.packages dev tools, which stands, I believe, for development tools. And that's what the package that we use to install a package from someone's GitHub. So after we've installed that package, we can run the install_GitHub command from this package, and we can install Papaya from Frederick Aust's GitHub account. So these are the 2 lines of code that you will need to do that. And after you do that, you restart your R. And when you open it up again, when you click on File and then New File, R Markdown, you will be able to select from a template, and you will have an APA article template in your R Markdown. And so you'll click on that. And then you get that front end, what I showed you before. This will already all have been written for you in, of course, a example case. So you'll have to write your own title, etc. But the whole structure, the skeleton of the document will be there. There will be a template APA article that you can adjust to your own liking. So let's talk about APA citations now. Now, I know that one of our biggest pains, of course, is reference list. And after you've after you've gone to 5 versions of your paper, having to again go through to your reference list to take out papers that you no longer cite, to add papers that you cite, et cetera, you won't have to do that again, because what R Markdown will do for you is it will generate the reference list exactly based on what you cite in the R Markdown. So what you refer to here in line is what will be knitted into the reference list. So let's get started with APA citations. What you'll need to do is you'll need to download a reference manager. Now, I personally recommend Zotero for this, because Zotero is very well integrated with R and RStudio and with the specific package Papaya that we use to create manuscripts. After you've downloaded Zotero, I recommend that you also download the Better BibTeX for Zotero extension, which is an extension that allows you to change your cite keys. So sometimes you'll want to refer to a paper as at Abi Esper 2018 or 2019, (2), whatever you want. So you can manually change your cite keys. And after we've done that, we'll install Cite R, which is an R package. It's an RStudio add-in that allows you to manually insert Markdown citations. So again, we'll have this drop-down functionality. It can directly access your reference database and keep your reference file updated. So how we do that is we run, again, we use DevTools and the install GitHub function from the DevTools package, and we download Cite R from this GitHub repository, which is also Frederick Aust's GitHub repository. So the way we now insert citations is one, we have to create a reference file using our reference manager. In this case, I would recommend Zotero, as I said. And then what we need to do is supply this reference file in our front matter. So let's say you have a folder for your manuscript. So we call this folder project 1. And in that folder, I have my R Markdown file. Make sure that in that folder, you also have your bib file, so your reference file that you created using Zotero. And in your front matter, you'll refer to it simply by, after this will already be in your APA template, bibliography, colon, and then between these square brackets, you will refer to this file simply by writing out its name. So it will always have a .bib extension, and you can choose your own name. Here I have a bib file called references.bib, and I refer to it in the front matter. And now in the R Markdown itself, in the text part, we can insert our citations several ways. One is we can just insert using our citation key. So manually typing out, this is what it looks like. So here I want to cite a 2019 paper by Yarkoni, The Generalizability Crisis. And I do that by between square brackets writing at Yarkoni 2019. I can always open up Zotero to check what the cite key is. So Zotero, you'll have it on your desktop, you'll have a tab to open it, and you can look at all the references that you added in. And then you can also check what the cite key is and potentially change it if you want to. Another, perhaps even easier way is, now that we've installed CiteR, we have this add-in that allows us to just click and manually insert our citations. So the way we do that is, in RStudio, you go to the toolbar and click on add-ins, and then click insert citations. And this is what it looks like. So this is how you can insert citations from within RStudio, within your R Markdown. You just click add-ins, insert citation, and then you can search through your reference list and click on any reference you want to add. And here you also see the possibility to connect and load your libraries, to reload your files, etc. So it's a really great way to automatically update your references. Anytime you add a new paper to your Zotero, it can automatically be integrated with RStudio, simply by clicking this connect and load libraries option. So this is how you insert citations. You've already seen me include a citation within parentheses, which is often how we cite. So here you have a table. In the first, I just described type of citation. In the second, I show you the syntax that you need to write in your R Markdown. And in the third column here, you can see what it's rendered as. So if I want a normal citation within parentheses, excuse me, I just write add Dinas 2016 within square brackets. If I want to add multiple citations, I do the same thing. I just separate them by a semicolon. If I want an in-text citation, I remove those square brackets and just use at Lacus 2014. If you'll excuse me, I'll just take a sip of water. We can also use the year only, add a prefix within the brackets or a suffix within the brackets. And like I said before, you can cite R packages too. All you have to do after loading all these packages in the R setup chunk, which I told you is highly recommended to make sure that everything can run correctly, you run RS. Yes.
So in your examples, those are all solo authored papers, but I see something with a multi-author here. Would the code look different, or is it just the first author that you list?
Do you mean with this one? So yeah, actually, that's a great point. I should next time include multi-author papers. This is just a coincidence that I didn't. The code will not look different. The citation key will, let's say you have a paper with 2 authors, you usually still have a citation key that is only the first author plus the year. And then what it will render as is Dinas and Doe 2016. So that you don't have to do anything differently. Yeah.
And what if you have a first author that has published multiple papers in a single year? How does the code differ then?
What Zotero will usually do, Zotero will automatically detect this. Oh, we have two different papers, same author, same year, and it will add an A and a B to the site key. So you'll usually, what you'll get then is add Dinas 2016A, add Dinas 2016B to distinguish between those two. Yeah.
And do you have to put the sites in the multiple citation example? Do you have to put them in order, or will it automatically order them for you?
It will automatically order them in alphabetical order. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure. Okay, so here's another example of me harnessing the power of this metadata in which so the front matter in which we use Papaya to generate an APA article, the code, and the text. So here's my R Markdown document in which I have a code chunk, I have my text, in which I also, you can see I use some formatting here. I use some LaTeX formatting here because I have set special symbols like delta. And I use right here an inline code. So let's walk through this. I have my code chunk in which I create an object called nFixed. And what I do here is I run a power analysis. So here it says, I want to know I'm running a power analysis for a t-test. My Cohen's d is 0.5. My significance level is alpha equals 0.05. So I'm going to reject the null hypothesis if my p-value is less than 0.05. I want a power of 80%. It's going to be a 2-sample t-test, and the alternative is one-sided. And as you can see, what I'm asking for here is the n. I want to know how many participants do I need. So I'm running a power analysis to see how many participants I need to have 80% power for this t-test. And I run here ceiling, which means rounded up. So it's basically a command to say round, but because we can't have 21.2 human beings, we have to round up. So I use the ceiling command, and I call this object n_fixed. And then I write my text here. I have a manuscript in which I say, if a researcher wants to conduct a one-sided 2-sample t-test, as you can see here, I've italicized the T for t-test. Then I say with an alpha of 5%, this would require between backticks and R n_fixed participants per group. And then I knitted, I click knit, and what I get is this. So here you see that I ran the code behind the scenes for me, and it ran that power analysis, and it's telling me you need 51 participants per group to have 80% power for this t-test. We can do the same thing for statistical output. So remember the model that I told you about, the regression model that I ran to predict well-being from these, from religiosity controlling for these covariates. Now, from this object that I created, I want to get the estimate for religiosity. So I get that by referring to APA_LM $estimate $religiosity. So I write the estimate for religiosity is, and again, this inline code, and this is what I get. So this is perfect because this is what you want to show up in your manuscript. You want your estimate and your confidence interval formatted as such. So that's how we get APA statistical output. I said here that we do another look, but I actually went through it already. So we'll skip this one. So some tips and tricks for Papaya. You can define a keyword shortcut for inserting citations. So remember when I said you can click add-ins and then insert citations. You can also define a keyboard shortcut. What I have is Command-Shift-R, so that every time when I'm typing in Markdown and I realize I need to insert a citation here, I click Command-Shift-R, and then I can just browse for my reference list, click the right reference, and click Insert. So that's a great addition too. And then there's two very helpful resources, the Papaya manual and papers that are already written with Papaya. Some people are generous enough to post their underlying script so that you can use that as an example. And you are always welcome to reach out to me as well if you would like me to send you an example of my work. So this was the workshop so far. I'm of course happy to go through some questions. And this is definitely how I feel about R. So at first I was like, why did I do this? I remember being an RA before I started my PhD, and the PhD student that I worked with told us that it would be a good idea to learn R. And I had no idea what I was doing and was always copying things from Stack Overflow and feeling helpless and constantly running into errors. And now I feel incredibly passionate about it, passionate enough that I'm here giving this workshop, developing these slides in R, developing my website in R, writing my manuscripts in R, etc. And yeah, I'm very happy with R and all its functions. So that was the workshop for today. Any questions?
Nicely done. Nicely done. You know, as someone who is on that other side of, oh no, this is intimidating. You did a nice job of helping to demystify parts of it. Because I'm so old school, I think I'm going to have a hard road still ahead, but I think you've just made it a little bit easier. I guess I do have some questions, but I think I'm still formulating them a little bit. If Nicole has something specific or wants to lead the way, she's welcome to get started.
I don't have any questions specifically, but I think one way we could get around what we were talking about earlier about sharing manuscripts, it seems like it would be really useful to use this, for example, to like generate graphs and results sections. And then we could always paste that back into a manuscript and like iterate on the Word document. So yeah, that's how I envision myself using this. I think it would be super helpful for results sections.
I completely agree with that. That's actually, so I have my solo authored work. I have one solo authored paper, and that's with that paper, I did everything in R. But that's not exactly, you know, possible with multi-author papers. So there's one paper that Preeti actually presented today here at this conference, and that's 4 of us. And some of the work had already been done by one of the co-authors before I came along in a different, you know, in SPSS, I joined, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're doing with that paper is exactly what you just described. We have we have a Word document, and both Preeti and myself, we tend to use R Markdown to generate the graphs, the figures, the tables, and then we just save it in a Word format and copy it into the manuscript. Yeah, and I completely agree. So far, that for me has been the easiest way to collaborate with co-authors, and it's still a lifesaver. It's still, you know, the fact that you don't have to write your tables anymore is a huge difference already. Yeah,
totally. And also more accessible when you're like recommending it to people. Like I feel like I could do that, but writing a whole manuscript, I'm like, I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's a good maybe a stepping stone approach to evaluating whether or not to do the whole manuscript. I guess that would mean the bibliography function would be less helpful because you're not doing it for the whole manuscript. That's probably more useful for that. But yeah. I mean, on the bibliography component, it sounds to me like you have to do a lot of importing into Zotero. And I mean, I think if you're developing an area of expertise, you'll come back and cite similar papers over and over. So there's some degree of savings to that. Yeah, so I guess, I mean, you got to make these reference lists somehow. Does Zotero allow you to do different formats, APA and non-APA? Because that's a big issue in management, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's the nice thing about Zotero is at the click of a button, you can switch your citation style from APA to Chicago to MLA or anything else you need specifically for the journal or conference that you're submitting to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you Nicole, this is going to be real fundamental. So
no worries.
So it sounds to me like, so I have already R Studio. I had R Markdown installed, but apparently whatever I had was not up to date and had to do all this updating. And Papaya seems like it's not available on Crown. I have to go, I guess, to GitHub to get it. Were there other packages that I missed that I'll also need to install?
I think for this one, that's it. What will probably happen when you install R Markdown. So let me just jump to that slide. Let's see. So we have getting started with R Markdown. So when you run this line of code, install that packages R Markdown, it will probably tell you which other packages you need and which you need to update. And then all you have to do, it will say something like, do you want to update all of these? Press 1. And then you type 1 into your console. And then for the Papaya one, that one relies on several other packages too. So when we run this is how we install it. This is, oh, sorry. There we go. This is how we install Papaya. And when you do that, it will probably do the same thing. It will tell you something like, you need the tiny labels package. And you can just click 1 to install that along. It will usually install the dependencies automatically. So the only 2 things that you'll need to do, I think, is install R Markdown and Papaya. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
Great.
Okay, great. Yeah, this gives me something to play around with. And this video will be coming available at some point over the next day or 2, I guess.
I assume so. Yeah, that's the organizers who are recording this. So
nice, yeah.
that I don't know about. Yeah.
And the slide deck, you have a personal website. Could you drop that link in the
sure.
chat box?
Sure thing. Because the slides, so you can find the slides here. Sometimes I lose the chat box when I'm presenting. There it is. Okay, so this is a place where you can find the slides, but I'll send you my website because it has a static version of the slides, which might be nice to just be able to save a PDF is always nice because these slides are HTML. So I'll be right there. Okay, there we go. So my website is shalon.rbind.io, and then we go to our last post. There we go.
Okay, that's your website. The first one is the live slide deck.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And the second one is my website, and it refers to the blog post in which I posted these slides for today.
All right. Wonderful.
Great.
Thanks so much. And good
Thank
timing
you.
too. I got to take my kid to soccer practice now. But
Awesome. Oh,
no,
great. I love soccer. That's great.
Thanks for taking the time to put this workshop on. I really appreciate it. And good luck to your pursuits.
Sure thing. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and engaging so much. I really appreciated it.
All right. Hey, you have a good night or afternoon, and maybe I'll see you around the rest of the conference.
Great. See you. Bye-bye.